Professor Keth'var had seen many things in his 200 years of teaching xenobiology at the Galactic Military Academy. He had witnessed the fall of the hegemony, the rise of the coalition, and the nervous integration of dozens of species into what they laughingly called civilized space. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the human exchange student sitting in the third row. Maya Torres looked harmless enough, small by galactic standards, barely reaching the shoulder of a typical Vorthak, with that peculiar fur growing only from her scalp that humans seemed so proud of. She sat quietly, taking notes on her primitive electronic device, occasionally glancing up with those unsettling forward-facing eyes that marked her species as predators. The lecture hall buzzed with the usual mix of species. Tall, graceful Altarians with their crystalline skin that caught the light beautifully, stout Borak engineers whose rocky hide could deflect small arms fire, even a few Zilani, their tentacles writhing as they processed information through chemical receptors. All of them hung on Keth'var's every word as he detailed the military capabilities of various coalition members. "Now, class." Keth'var's voice resonated through his vocal chambers, creating the harmonic tones that marked formal Vorthak speech. "We turn to combat effectiveness ratios. The Altarian Guard maintains an impressive 12-to-1 kill ratio in atmospheric combat. Their energy weapons are simply magnificent." A few Altarians preened visibly at the praise. Keth'var continued, his forearms gesturing to holographic displays showing battle statistics. The Borak heavy infantry achieves 8-to-1 in ground engagements. Quite remarkable, considering their straightforward approach to warfare. Several Borak students rumbled approvingly, their rocky features creasing into what might have been smiles. The Zilani Space Marines manage an outstanding 15-to-1 ratio in ship-to-ship boarding actions. Their ability to fight in multiple gravitational orientations gives them considerable advantages. Maya Torres raised her hand. Keth'var paused. In all his years of teaching, exchange students rarely participated in discussions about military statistics. They usually sat quietly, absorbed the information, and left. But there was something in the human's posture, something in the way her lips curved slightly upward, that made his mandibles twitch nervously. "Yes, Miss Torres." "What's the kill ratio for a single Earth Marine?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The lecture hall, which had been filled with the comfortable rustling of students taking notes and the occasional whispered comment, fell silent. Completely, utterly silent. Keth'var felt his 3 hearts skip a beat. He had been dreading this moment since the human exchange program began. Earth was new to the coalition, barely 50 years since first contact, and their military statistics were classified, highly classified, the kind of classified that made even senior coalition officials nervous. Well, Keth'var began, his vocal harmonics betraying his discomfort. "Human military data is still being integrated into our databases." Maya's smile widened slightly. Oh, that was not a good sign. Keth'var had studied human facial expressions extensively after the first exchange students arrived, and that particular smile suggested the human knew something he didn't want her to know. Maya continued, her voice carrying that deceptively casual tone that humans used when they were about to drop a conversational bomb. "I'm just curious how we stack up against everyone else. For academic purposes." A Zilani student near the front raised one tentacle. "Surely human Marines cannot be more effective than established coalition forces. Humans are barely out of their pre-spaceflight phase." Maya turned to look at the Zilani, and Keth'var noticed something that made his skin crawl. The human's pupils dilated slightly, and her breathing changed. Subtle signs, but ones he had learned to recognize. The human was experiencing what their psychologists called anticipation. "You think so?" Maya asked the Zilani. "That's interesting." An Altarian student, her crystalline features catching the light as she moved, added her voice to the discussion. "Our military historians estimate that human ground forces would achieve perhaps 3 or 4-to-1 against standard opposition. Respectable for a new species, but hardly exceptional." 3 or 4 to 1, Maya repeated slowly, as if testing the words. Against standard opposition. Yes, the Altarian continued, warming to her subject. Humans lack the natural advantages of more evolved species. No energy resistance, no natural armor, no enhanced sensory capabilities. Your technology is adequate, but not remarkable. Maya nodded thoughtfully. You know what? You're absolutely right. We don't have natural armor or energy resistance. We're pretty squishy, actually. Several students laughed at the humans' apparent self-deprecation. Keth'var, however, was beginning to sweat through his pores. He had a terrible feeling about where this conversation was heading. But here's the thing, Maya continued, her voice taking on a conversational tone that somehow made the room feel smaller. We do have one natural advantage that most species seem to overlook. And what might that be? Asked a Boric student, his rocky features expressing polite skepticism. Maya's smile became something altogether more predatory. We're absolutely, completely, utterly insane. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the respectful quiet of students listening to a lecture. This was the dead silence of prey animals realizing they were sharing space with something dangerous. Maya went on, apparently oblivious to the sudden tension in the room. Take the Battle of Kepler Station. You all studied that in Military History 201, right? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the class. The Battle of Kepler Station was required reading, a textbook example of how superior technology and positioning could overcome numerical disadvantages. Refresh my memory, Maya said, still smiling that increasingly uncomfortable smile. How many Drukhari assault troops attacked the station? An Altarian student consulted her notes. Approximately 12,000, supported by orbital bombardment platforms. Right. And how many defenders were there? The records indicate roughly 800 coalition personnel. Including the Earth Marine Detachment, Maya added helpfully. Yes, a small human unit. Perhaps 50 individuals. Maya nodded. 50 Marines. 1 platoon, actually. Pretty standard deployment. She paused, looking around the room with those predator eyes. Now, can anyone tell me what happened to those 12,000 Drukhari? The class fell silent again. Keth'var realized his hands were trembling slightly. He knew what had happened at Kepler Station. Every military instructor in the coalition knew. They just didn't talk about it. No volunteers? Maya asked. Okay, I'll tell you. They died. All of them. Every single Drukhari soldier who set foot on that station died. That's impossible, breathed a Zilani student. 12,000 to 800? The mathematics don't work. Oh, but they do, Maya replied cheerfully. See, you're thinking about it wrong. It wasn't 12,000 versus 800. For most of the battle, it was 12,000 versus 50. 50. The Altarian student's crystalline features had gone pale. What happened to the other coalition forces? They were evacuating civilians, Maya explained. Standard protocol when you can't defend a position. Get the non-combatants out first, fall back to prepared positions, call for reinforcement. She paused, her smile becoming almost nostalgic. Except the Marines didn't get the memo about falling back. Professor Keth'var finally found his voice. Miss Torres, perhaps we should move on to other topics. Oh, but we're just getting to the good part, Maya protested. See, the Drukhari had this brilliant plan. Overwhelm the defenders with numbers, take the station quickly, use it as a forward base for their next offensive. Textbook strategy. She leaned back in her chair, looking remarkably relaxed for someone discussing mass slaughter. What they didn't account for was that Marines don't really do the whole overwhelmed by numbers thing. It's kind of against our religion. Your religion? Asked a confused Boric student. Figure of speech, Maya clarified, though some of the guys take it pretty seriously. Anyway, when the Drukhari hit the station, they expected the defenders to retreat to the central defensive positions, set up crossfire lanes, maybe hold out for a few hours until help arrived. Her smile widened. Instead, the Marines went hunting. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Even the environmental systems seemed to be holding their breath. Hunting. The word came out as barely a whisper from somewhere in the back of the room. "Oh yes," Maya said, her voice taking on the tone of someone sharing a particularly amusing anecdote. "Turns out when you put 50 highly trained, heavily armed, slightly unhinged humans in a target-rich environment and tell them the enemy wants to hurt civilians, interesting things happen." She pulled up her datapad and began reading, as if reciting from a shopping list. The after-action report makes for fascinating reading. Drukhari assault teams started disappearing, not dying in firefights, mind you, disappearing, vanishing from their formations without a trace. Keth'var's mandibles were clicking involuntarily now, a sign of extreme distress among his species. He should stop this. He should change the subject, dismiss the class, anything to avoid where this was heading. But he couldn't, because despite his growing horror, he was fascinated. They all were. The Drukhari commanders thought it was a technical malfunction at first, Maya continued. Communication gear failure, maybe sensor ghosts. But then they started finding the bodies. She looked up from her datapad, scanning the silent faces around her. Well, pieces of bodies anyway. The Marines had gotten creative. Creative how? The question came from a Zilani student who immediately looked like he regretted asking. Maya's grin became positively feral. Ever heard of psychological warfare? The Marines left the pieces where the next Drukhari patrol would find them, along with little presents. Presents. Booby traps, improvised explosive devices, motion-activated claymore mines made from maintenance equipment. One particularly artistic Marine rigged a dead Drukhari's helmet to explode when someone tried to remove it. She paused for effect, clearly enjoying the horrified expressions around her. The Drukhari stopped advancing. 12,000 troops stopped cold by 50 Marines who were supposed to be retreating. An Altarian student's voice cracked slightly as she asked, "But surely the Drukhari regrouped." "Overwhelming force?" "Oh, they tried," Maya assured her. "They called in orbital strikes on suspected Marine positions. Problem was, the Marines weren't in positions. They were moving. Constantly. See, humans have this funny quirk where we can function on very little sleep, survive on minimal rations, and keep fighting long after most species would have collapsed." She flipped through her datapad again. The Drukhari bombardment lasted 6 hours. When it stopped, they sent in reconnaissance teams to assess the damage. Guess what happened to those teams? Nobody answered. Nobody wanted to know. They disappeared too. The Marines had used the bombardment as cover to reposition. When the recon teams came in, they walked into what the after-action report calls a carefully orchestrated killing field. Maya stood up, beginning to pace as she spoke. Keth'var noticed that several students unconsciously leaned away from her as she moved. "This is where it gets really interesting," she said. The Marines had split into two-man teams, a buddy system, we call it. 12 teams spread throughout the station, each team equipped with enough firepower to level a city block. She stopped pacing and faced the class directly. The Drukhari never knew what hit them. One moment they'd be advancing down a corridor, the next moment half their squad would be gone. Humans are very, very good at making things explode at exactly the right moment. But the numbers, protested a Borak student. Even if each Marine killed dozens of enemies, the mathematics still don't work. Maya's laugh was genuinely delighted. "Oh, you sweet, logical creature. You're still thinking like a civilized being. The Marines weren't just killing Drukhari. They were breaking them." Breaking them? Psychologically. See, most species fight in organized formations. They advance together, retreat together, support each other. It's very sensible and practical. She resumed pacing, her movements somehow predatory despite her small size. Humans fight like a pack of rabid animals who happen to go to engineering school. We don't care about formations or tactical doctrine. We care about making the enemy too scared to fight. Keth'var realized he was gripping his desk hard enough to leave claw marks. "Miss Torres, I really think." By the fourth hour, Maya continued, ignoring him completely. The Drakari weren't advancing anymore. They were huddled in defensive positions, shooting at shadows. Every sound made them jump. Every flicker of movement sent them into panic. She pulled up another file on her datapad. The commanding general's personal log, recovered after the battle, makes interesting reading. Quote, "The humans are not soldiers. They are demons wearing armor. They appear from nowhere, kill without mercy, and vanish like smoke. My troops are afraid to move. Some are refusing orders." The silence in the room was absolute now. Even the environmental systems seemed to have stopped humming. "That's when the Marines made their final move," Maya said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. They had spent hours studying Drakari tactics, learning their movement patterns, identifying their command structure. She looked around the room, meeting each horrified gaze in turn. Then they did something that no civilized species would ever consider. They went after the officers. "Targeted assassinations during combat," gasped an Altarian. That's effective," Maya finished. "Very, very effective." Within 2 hours, the entire Drakari command structure was gone. Not captured, not wounded. Gone. She sat back down, apparently satisfied with the effect her story was having. Without leadership, 12,000 Drakari soldiers became 12,000 terrified individuals. They started surrendering. Not to the coalition forces, mind you. To the 50 Marines who had been hunting them. Professor Keth'var found his voice again, though it came out as barely a croak. "The kill ratio?" Maya consulted her datapad one final time. "Let's see, 50 Marines, 12,000 enemy casualties, with approximately 8,000 confirmed kills directly attributable to Marine action." She looked up, that predatory smile back in full force. "That works out to roughly 160 to 1. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. 160 to 1. The Altarians managed 12 to 1. The Borek achieved 8 to 1. The Zelani, with all their advantages, reached 15 to 1. Humans achieved 160 to 1. Of course, Maya added casually, that was just one engagement. The Marines have been refining their techniques since then. She began packing up her things, apparently preparing to leave for her next class. These days, the average is quite a bit higher. As she reached the door, she turned back to address the stunned classroom one final time. "Oh, and for what it's worth, that was just one platoon having a bad day. Earth has about 2 million Marines." The door slid shut behind her with a soft hiss, leaving 43 students and one professor sitting in absolute silence, contemplating what it meant to share a galaxy with a species that considered 160 to 1 a starting point for improvement. Professor Keth'var looked down at his lecture notes, then slowly closed them. Somehow, discussing the military capabilities of other species seemed rather pointless now. 3 days passed before Professor Keth'var could bring himself to return to his advanced military strategy class. 3 days of sleepless nights, reviewing classified reports he probably shouldn't have accessed, and questioning every assumption he'd ever made about warfare in the galaxy. The lecture hall felt different now. Word had spread, as word always does in academic institutions. Students from other classes had somehow heard about Maya Torres' casual revelation, and the room was packed beyond capacity. Even faculty members lingered near the back, trying to look inconspicuous. Maya sat in the same seat, third row center, looking exactly as harmless as she had before. But now Keth'var could see what he'd missed earlier. The way she moved with perfect economy of motion. How her eyes constantly tracked movement around the room. The slight bulge under her left arm that suggested she was carrying something the Academy's security scanners had missed. Or perhaps they hadn't missed it. Perhaps they'd simply decided not to ask questions. Today, Keth'var announced, his vocal harmonics betraying none of his inner turmoil, "We will examine defensive strategies employed by coalition forces against superior numbers." A ripple of anticipation ran through the packed auditorium. Everyone knew why they were really here. Maya raised her hand. "Before we begin," she said, that same deceptively sweet smile playing across her features, "I was wondering if anyone had questions about our last discussion." The silence was immediate and total. 47 students and a dozen faculty members holding their collective breath. A brave Altarian in the front row finally spoke up. "Miss Torres, was the Kepler station incident typical of human military engagements?" Maya tilted her head thoughtfully. "Define typical." "I mean, was it representative of standard human combat performance?" "Oh, you want to know if that's as good as we get?" Maya's laugh was musical and terrifying. "That's adorable." She stood up, moving to the front of the class with Professor Keth'var's reluctant permission. Kepler Station was actually considered a pretty routine operation. Training exercise level stuff, really. A Boric student's rocky features contorted in confusion. Training exercise? 12,000 enemies dead? Well, yeah, I mean, it wasn't like they were facing real opposition. The room seemed to collectively recoil. If 12,000 Drakari wasn't real opposition, what exactly did humans consider a challenge? Maya pulled out her datapad and connected it to the classroom's holographic display system. "Let me show you what happens when Marines get creative." The display lit up with tactical readouts from a battle that made Kepler Station look like a minor skirmish. This is the siege of Fortress Prime. Maybe you've heard of it? Every military student in the galaxy had heard of Fortress Prime. It was considered the most impregnable defensive position ever constructed. Built into an asteroid, surrounded by overlapping shield generators and automated defense platforms, garrisoned by 50,000 of the hegemony's finest troops. The coalition spent 3 years trying to crack this place, Maya continued conversationally. Lost 8 fleets, approximately 2 million soldiers, and still couldn't make a dent in the defenses. She switched to the next display, so they called in the Marines. Professor Keth'var felt his 3 hearts stop beating. He knew where this was going, and he desperately didn't want to hear it. "How many Marines?" whispered a Zilani student. 12, Maya replied cheerfully. The word echoed in the stunned silence like a gunshot. 12, not 12,000, not 1,200. 12 individual Marines against the most fortified position in known space. "That's impossible," breathed an Altarian faculty member. "The mathematical probability of success is exactly 0, Maya agreed, if you're thinking conventionally. But Marines don't really do conventional thinking. It interferes with the creative process." She pulled up a schematic of Fortress Prime, its defensive systems highlighted in ominous red. The coalition had been trying to break through the shields using conventional fleet tactics. Big ships, bigger guns, hope something gets through eventually. The display shifted to show attack vectors that had all failed spectacularly. The Marines took one look at this and said, "Why are we trying to break through the shields when we can just turn them off?" "Turn them off?" A Boric engineer leaned forward, professional interest overriding his fear. The shield generators were inside the fortress, heavily defended, impossible to reach. Maya's grin became absolutely predatory. "Only if you're trying to reach them from outside." She highlighted a section of the fortress's structure. See, the Marines noticed something everyone else had missed. Fortress Prime was built inside an asteroid. And asteroids, well, they're not solid rock all the way through. The display zoomed in, showing a complex network of natural caves and fissures running through the asteroid's core. Mining surveys from 2 centuries ago showed extensive cave systems. Everyone assumed they'd been sealed during construction. "They weren't sealed?" asked a student. "Oh, they were sealed," Maya confirmed, with standard military-grade barriers. The kind designed to keep out armies with conventional weapons. She paused for effect, clearly enjoying the mounting tension. Not the kind designed to keep out 12 humans with demolition training and severe anger management issues. The display showed a new tactical overlay, tracking movement through the cave systems. 12 small dots, moving like ghosts through the asteroid's heart. The Marines spent 6 weeks mapping every tunnel, every chamber, every structural weak point. They learned the fortress better than the people who built it. A Zolani faculty member interrupted. Surely the defenders detected their presence. Sensors, patrols. You'd think so, Maya agreed. But here's the thing about humans. We're really good at not being detected when we don't want to be. It's a survival trait from back when we were dodging things with bigger teeth than us. The display showed the fortress's sensor logs from that period. Empty. Nothing but background radiation and the occasional maintenance drone. For 6 weeks, 50,000 hegemony soldiers lived and worked directly above 12 Marines who were planning their deaths in excruciating detail. And they never knew. Professor Keth'var realized he was gripping his desk hard enough to crack the metal. What happened next? Maya's smile became something that belonged in nightmares. The Marines did what Marines do best. They improvised. The tactical display exploded into motion. 12 small dots, moving simultaneously toward different targets throughout the fortress. They hit everything at once: power generators, shield emitters, communication arrays, life support systems. 12 coordinated strikes, executed with precision timing. She pulled up damage reports that scrolled endlessly down the screen. The fortress went dark in exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. No power, no shields, no communications, no life support. But the garrison protested an ulterior. 50,000 trained soldiers were suddenly trapped in a pitch-black metal box with 12 extremely motivated humans who knew exactly where everything was. The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for funeral services. Maya continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone discussing the weather. The Marines had spent those 6 weeks doing more than just mapping. They'd been placing charges. Lots and lots of charges. Charges. Explosives. See, the fortress was designed to withstand external bombardment. Internal explosions, well, that's a different engineering problem entirely. The display showed structural damage assessments. Red zones spread through the fortress like a disease, indicating critical failures in load-bearing supports. The Marines brought down entire sections of the fortress. Sealed blast doors became tomb doors. In heavily armored defensive positions became death traps. A Borak student's voice was barely audible. How many casualties? Maya consulted her datapad with the casual air of someone checking a grocery list. Total hegemony losses, 49,863 confirmed dead. 137 taken prisoner. She looked up, meeting the horrified stares around the room. Marine casualties, 0. The number hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow. 0. 12 Marines had eliminated the most powerful fortress in the galaxy without losing a single soldier. Of course, Maya added conversationally, that was before they got really creative. Before anyone could ask what she meant by that, she pulled up another file. This is from the Battle of the Maelstrom Nebula. Coalition forces were trapped behind enemy lines, completely surrounded, outnumbered roughly 1,000 to 1. The display showed a tactical nightmare. The coalition ships, hopelessly outnumbered, trapped in a nebula that interfered with long-range communications and hyperspace jumps. The enemy had them cold, no escape routes, no reinforcements coming, no hope of survival. Standard military doctrine called for surrender negotiations. Maya's smile became genuinely fond. Instead, the coalition commanders called for volunteers. Volunteers for what? Asked a faculty member, though his expression suggested he really didn't want to know. For the most insane military operation in recorded history. They called it Operation Last Stand. The display shifted to show ship movements that defied every principle of space combat tactics. Coalition vessels, hopelessly outnumbered, suddenly accelerating directly toward the enemy fleet. The plan was simple. Load every available ship with volunteers and explosives, then ram the enemy fleet at maximum velocity. Gasps echoed through the auditorium. Suicide attacks were considered barbaric by every civilized species in the galaxy. But here's where it gets interesting, Maya continued. The volunteers weren't planning to die. They were planning to board. Board enemy ships? During ramming attacks? Oh yes, see, humans have this peculiar ability to survive impacts that would kill most other species. Something about our bone density and muscle structure. Very useful in high-G situations. The tactical display showed the impossible. The coalition ships, their hulls crumpled from ramming attacks, disgorging boarding parties directly into enemy vessels. Each ramming ship carried about 50 volunteers, mostly Marines with some Navy special operations mixed in. They hit 47 enemy vessels simultaneously. Professor Keth'var found his voice. What happened to the boarding parties? Maya's expression became thoughtful. Well, they found themselves inside enemy ships, surrounded by hostile crew members, with no backup and no way out. She paused, as if considering how to phrase her next words. So they did what humans do in hopeless situations. They got angry. Angry. Very, very angry. See, the thing about humans is that we don't handle desperation well. When we're cornered with no way out, we tend to get creative. The display showed after-action reports that read like horror stories. Enemy ships, captured from within by boarding parties that shouldn't have survived the initial impact. The volunteers didn't just take the ships. They turned them around and started attacking the rest of the enemy fleet, from inside captured vessels. Oh, it gets better. The humans had studied enemy ship designs extensively. They knew exactly which systems to target for maximum effect. Maya pulled up engineering schematics that highlighted critical vulnerabilities in enemy ship construction. Turns out, when you know which fuel lines to cut and which reactor safeties to disable, you can turn any ship into a very large bomb. They turned captured ships into weapons. Devised weapons. The best kind. By the end of the battle, the enemy fleet was shooting at itself, trying to stop human-controlled ships from ramming their own vessels. The casualty reports were staggering. An entire enemy fleet, numbering in the thousands of ships, effectively destroyed by a few hundred human volunteers, with no backup plan and a serious anger management problem. The coalition losses, Maya announced, were surprisingly light. About 60% of the ramming ships were recovered, along with most of their crews. Most? Some of the volunteers decided they liked their new ships and kept them. Command figured it was easier to just update the fleet registry than argue with Marines who'd just single-handedly won an impossible battle. She closed her datapad and looked around the stunned auditorium. Any other questions about human military capabilities? The silence stretched on for nearly a full minute before a brave Altarian student raised her hand. Miss Torres, are all human military units this effective? Maya laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both musical and terrifying. Oh, you sweet summer child. I've been telling you about the Marines. They're just one branch of our military. There are others? Oh yes, the Army specializes in large-scale ground operations. Very thorough. The Navy handles space combat and tends to think big. The Air Force controls atmospheric operations and has a thing for precision strikes. She paused, her smile becoming almost nostalgic. And then there are the Special Operations Forces. They're the ones we call when the Marines think a mission might be too dangerous. The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. If Marines were considered the safe option for dangerous missions, what exactly did human Special Operations Forces do? But the really scary ones, Maya continued, apparently oblivious to the mounting horror around her, are the intelligence services. They're the ones who figure out where to send everyone else. She packed up her things and headed for the door, then turned back one final time. Oh, and just so everyone knows, Earth currently has about 50 million people in various military services. We're a peaceful species, but we do like to be prepared. As the door slid shut behind her, Professor Keth'var looked out at an auditorium full of beings who had just realized they were sharing a galaxy with a species that considered mathematics merely a suggestion when it came to warfare. He made a mental note to recommend that the Academy add a new course to the curriculum, how to surrender properly to human forces. It seemed like practical knowledge that everyone should have.